Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we are reviewing Captain Marvel number 22 and 23. I have the print copy of 22 here, and because it had come out before I had a chance to review this book, I also reviewed 23 on digital. Both written by Kelly Thompson, and I believe the same art team throughout, with Lee Garbett doing the artwork, and Tamra Bonvillain, I should say, one of my favorite colorists, doing the coloring. Clayton Cowles does lettering. I haven't read this volume of Captain Marvel yet, but I figured in the wake of Empire and her apparently becoming an accuser, it was a good time to check her out. However, with this being the start of a new story arc, officially after the Empire tie-in, Carol has already shed that title, and any potential changes to her character along with those lines or anything like that, it really isn't going to take. Really cementing how pointless Empire really was. But that's nothing against Kelly Thompson. She didn't write that event or anything, so obviously she didn't intend for Captain Marvel to become the next accuser in the Kree Empire, and that ended up going to her half sister, her Kree half sister. Apparently, is the thing that they say in the blurb at the beginning of this, but none of that really matters. And we just go into this story, which is just kind of taking place after that, with Carol back on Earth and her calling in a bunch of friends to help investigate some sort of emergency beacon they've detected out there that they believe is some sort of crashed alien thing that they want to look into. They don't really know any more than that at the moment. So she's joined by her boyfriend, James Rhodes, the War Machine, Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, Hazmat, a younger superhero who I thought was dead from the events of Avengers Arena. And I'm actually really glad to see back. She's a fun character. And now that I think about it, I think she is one of the survivors from that story. So it's cool times. They eventually find out the thing they're investigating is actually a downed spaceship or Quinjet of some kind. And when they go to investigate, all these vines entangle all the heroes except for Carol. Although she's grabbed too, but she's suddenly surrounded by a light and wakes up like in a wintry world with Phantom X and this woman standing over her, and they're like, "Who the hell are you? Where did you come from?" And they nearly get into a battle, and Captain Marvel gets stabbed by what is clearly Psylocke's psychic katana, but that ain't Psylocke. Or some sort of thing like that. But pretty quickly, this guy gets her to stand down because he recognizes Carol is Captain Marvel. And he says, "You look different. What happened to you? Didn't you just fly, or did you fly into the sun kind of thing?" And pretty soon, Carol, I don't know, reveals that she is much is farther from the past, and they explain, "Oh, this is the future to you, and this is the year 2052." And his name is Jerry Drew, just a baby in her timeline, but Spider-Woman's son. And he's joined by Emma Frost. But it's interesting, Emma is permanently in diamond form, although she won't exactly elaborate as to why. And we got ourselves an alternate timeline story for this story arc, as it becomes abundantly clear. The woman is Danny Cage, I believe her name is. So she's Luke Cage's child, something like that. And she also meets, there's another young girl, and she's the daughter of James Rhodes, War Machine, except for, not Carol's daughter. So there's a lot of interesting stuff being thrown at Carol's way all at once, but they're attacked by crazy demons, so she doesn't have a ton of time to analyze it all. But pretty quickly, Captain Marvel defeats them, and she is takes a moment and comes across this wall that has all these names of fallen heroes, including James Rhodes and all these other characters. But she's approached by the still living Jessica Drew, and pretty soon Carol starts to learn about some of the details of this future. It's actually the timeline of the story Captain Marvel: The End, which is pretty interesting overall. I I don't actually know that story, so a lot of this I'm picking up on context, but it is like we were almost stumbling onto this alternate timeline along the lines of Old Man Logan and Carol coming into that sort of story, where another version of Carol had already been and managed to reignite the sun of this world so that they were able to come out from living underground and go back to the surface. It was a pretty interesting way they sort of brought her character into this. But they've also been dealing with this threat on the surface now called Ove, who is the source of like their attacks earlier and why humanity's still on the brink, even though they've managed to come back onto the surface. And pretty soon, an emissary of theirs comes with a message for this new arrival of Captain Marvel, and it's actually Luke Cage. And the next issue picks up right off of that, and Luke Cage has weird, like, glowing green eyes, and he says, like, Ove wants to speak to Captain Marvel. He's intrigued by her arrival and is aware of it, and just sort of leaves. Clearly not the Luke Cage hero that, like, Captain Marvel knew, or even his daughter, who's now one of these heroes Carol's joined with, knew either. So the Carol starts to learn more about this world, and basically they suffered from two wars, both very cataclysmic, and they call it an alien threat that attacked them, but they don't really know that. It's all very vague what took out this world, but the first wave wiped out all these heroes, and then in between that and the second wave, all these children were born, and the survivors did manage to regrow for a little bit until humanity was basically wiped out by the second wave. And then this disease like demolished the population further, and the sun started to dim for reasons they aren't even fully aware of, but they think it is connected to this threat that just wiped the floor with all these superheroes in an unspecified way. And it all ended up like into going into the Captain Marvel the end story. So that's really all we know so far. Pretty soon, Carol and a bunch of these new heroes set out to meet up with this Ove, and it's actually the character right on the cover there, that Atlantean fellow, who's apparently named Ove, and he greets Carol very warmly and says, "Welcome to Atlantis." It's actually a bit of a sticking point I have with that second issue. It has Carol and this Atlantean fighting on the cover, but they only encounter each other at the end of the issue. I really don't like when comic books do that, even though they do that quite a bit. Arya, if you don't like the character, then don't join the stream. Yeah. That's all I got to say to that. um, so, yeah, that's this story arc. I do have to say, Carol's always kind of been famously better in her own solo series, and that's very true here. But I am very like middle ground about this story, and if you're kind of hearing me go through this and it sounds like very familiar territory in terms of alternate timelines and like a hero being flung into the future, I agree. It's particularly familiar to Wonder Woman Dead Earth, and like even just stuff like Old Man Logan or Venom Beyond, a currently ongoing story arc from the Venom series. Um, that's a pretty unfortunate aspect of this because I love the like talent behind this series. Kelly Thompson is a great writer, but the art team is excellent. Between Bonvillain's coloring and uh, Lee Garbett's like penciling and inking and stuff, it's got a lot of excellent appeal to it. I really like how the characters are drawn. They're expressive and full of life, but also have a very cartoony flair. A page like this, which really isn't gonna be something that sticks out in my memory, kind of does as much as it. Okay, whatever. Yeah, just watch out. I'm not against it. It's just like if you're gonna like call her a trash character, it's like, well, like you're describing the writers more than anything, if that's the case, because Like she's a great character in this. It's just a really like it's a story we've seen before, and I don't love the more vague aspects of it, and do hope we kind of get into it a little bit more. I don't know if I would appreciate this story more if I had read Captain Marvel at the end, but realistically, I shouldn't have to. Although that might be an interesting selling feature of this book. And otherwise, it's okay. I do like a lot of the superheroes that we get to see. They're various children. There's like Phantom X5, and it's implied that he's literally just some other creation of Phantom X made down the road. Uh, that sort of stuff is interesting, but broadly speaking, it is a pretty weak story, and that is kind of disappointing. And I don't think I would recommend it, in spite of some excellent artwork. If you are feeling at all tired of stories with alternate timelines, alternate futures, alternate universes, that kind of thing, well, then unfortunately, this story is exactly that sort of thing all over again. And I don't think there's enough appeal out of it. That being said, I did just kind of pick up this book in 23 just to sort of check out this latest iteration of Captain Marvel. I've read some good runs with this character before. She definitely works a lot better in the solo series, like as opposed to in the Avengers, where they keep writing her like a fascist for some reason. And I do like agree with what Arya was saying in chat earlier in that regard. Like it is a pretty bad character if we just go by like crossover stories and Avengers standards. She's in rough shape in that regard. But Kelly Thompson shows a vision like kind of beyond this particular storyline, which I'm not a huge fan of a series that a storyline I can really get behind. Not only does it have stellar artwork to back it up, but the general idea of Carol just hanging out with other superheroes. And I looked at the rest of the series, and it seems to be a pretty recurring thing. That aspect of it is pretty cool. And she has a great line at one point in this book where someone, I think it's, I think it's Rhodey's kid, actually, is feeling really discouraged and says she never really thought of herself as a superhero. And Carol says, well, from my time, a lot of different heroes were very reluctant to call themselves like a superhero or a hero because that's a very loaded term, and it doesn't leave room for like your humanity and your um like fragility and like ability to be flawed, which she doesn't really like. And I thought that was an excellent point. Bucket Think Tank says, work has kept me so behind on these streams. Glad I made one this time. Yeah, and I'm glad you could join us. It's a bit of a shame overall, but I do have to say, like, between the artwork and that idea of Carol just having like she can hang out with Ultimates or other Avengers and that sort of thing in different story arcs, as her kind of supporting cast in this series, that aspect of it I really like. I also really like the dynamic of Carol going to the future, and her relationship with Rhodey is like not even a blip on anyone's radar. Like Rhodey moved on eventually at some point or another, had a kid long after Carol basically disappeared from this timeline. It kind of works for me. And there's other good stuff where Carol feels guilty about not being there, but like Jessica Drew points out, it's like, well, you probably would have just died. Like everyone watched Thor get killed by this alien force that we still don't understand, and I agree when Jessica like says in this story, like I don't think she would survive or have made much of a difference. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's really like an alternate timeline or an alternate universe, or if they're going to get into that. I'm not too sure how motivated I am to get into it too much, though. Especially the way they were kind of teasing the Atlantean and stuff. Hey, Tevia, thanks for joining us. Unfortunately, I think that's about it, though, as far as stuff I have to say about this book. Um, Unfortunately, not a recommend, although one of those things where, like, it really just comes down to the story arc. If you're interested in an alternate timeline story, like Wonder Woman Dead Earth, because it is a lot like Wonder Woman Dead Earth, unfortunately, which I think kind of counts against it. But if you're in the mood for something like that, this is a great comic to pick up. Excellent artwork, well written, a lot of interesting character moments. I just think between like those stories I mentioned and the fact that we're actively reviewing Venom and it's kind of the same thing, um, that's where I really had a problem enjoying this book. It's just like, oh, I've indulged in this specific type of story so much lately, kind of because Marvel's been indulging it so much lately. That alternate timeline stuff. I guess there is a limit at a certain point between death metal and this and Venom, like I said, plus all the other recent stories. And I don't necessarily read, like, I'm reading other comics as we go along. So I'm reading older Avengers books that was doing the same thing back in the Bendis days. Yeah, I just I think I wish I got more out of this. Oh, and X of Swords is very alternate university too. Tevye mentioned them, but we'll leave that for another day. So thanks for joining me in stream, guys, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island. I do have more X of Swords comics to talk about, although I think we're gonna hold off on that until some of them more of them bulk up, because I too am getting tired of that. And I say that because Tevye is talking about them in chat, asking if Miles Morales dealt with alternate timelines. I mean, he always does, but that series is also doing it. But that's also completely different from the normal alternate universe type of stories. So you can do alternate universe stuff. I guess we're not quite ending it. Um, but like what Saladin Ahmed's doing with Miles Morales right now. But that's like, he's not going to an alternate universe. It's doing something completely different, and it's a pretty original story. This stuff, in comparison, is quite disappointing. But yeah, no hard feelings, Arya. I think I read your comment a little wrong the first time, and just, but I didn't respond to it. I just did it as like, I didn't want to leave that on the record. I don't even know if that's fair though. I might regret that now. Anyways, have a good one, guys.